Slow sales, oversupply, price war, lack of profitability. It's pretty legal to say that the Chinese EV industry is in panic mode. Tesla's CEO talked about this long ago, about the unsustainability of the Chinese EV industry, and pointed out that even though Chinese EV automakers will eventually rule the market along with Tesla, they'll also face numerous challenges. Once again, he showed excellent prediction skills. And today, we'll bring you 6 reasons why Elon Musk was right about the ongoing Chinese EV industry bloodbath. Welcome to Evolution Tech, where technology meets tomorrow, leading the charge into the ever-evolving landscape of electric vehicles, EVs, and groundbreaking green technologies. 6. Lack of capital. Just a few years ago, the Chinese EV industry was crowded with startups. According to some sources, the total number was over 500. So, it was pretty obvious that such a state could not sustain itself in the long run. Soon enough, it became clear that one of the biggest challenges for all these companies was to ensure a constant cash flow. Most of them relied primarily on government incentives, but even an economy like China wasn't able to support that many. Requirements were becoming higher and higher, and with the inability to sell enough vehicles, many companies were left without any support. And as Musk pointed out, that particularly affected the second and third tier EV makers, smaller scale companies. These automakers were never able to ensure constant cash flow. Instead, they encountered disruption in capital chains, which led to significant challenges in terms of sustaining their operations. Some companies never established decent production assemblies, but with minimal margins, they were never able to achieve desired product quality and competitiveness. 5. Inability to make a profit. You don't have to be a financial expert to know that you can't run a business with minimal or no profit margins. That's another thing that Musk pointed out several months ago when he talked about the expansion of Chinese EV companies. Many of these EV makers, such as BYD, NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto, have made some fantastic achievements in terms of technology. But most of them still don't make a profit. Even if they do, these margins are minimal and nowhere near as high as in the case of Tesla. According to some sources, they are 14% to 70% behind Tesla. And if you can trust the latest reports, BYD remains the only Chinese company that makes a profit. As for the rest, they're either losing money or walking on the edge. Just take NIO, for example. This company didn't just achieve amazing things technology-wise, it was also one of the first Chinese EV makers to establish a respectable production system with a new facility that employs over 11,000 workers. With a couple of pretty amazing models launched, everything seemed perfect. Eventually, one thing left out, the sales numbers, which were way below the company's projections. And as a result, the company lost around $35,000 on every vehicle it sold in the last year. Of course, this inevitably leads us to the previous number, lack of capital, as the company is currently looking for new investors outside China. Another good example is Polestar, a company that was usually seen as Volvo's more prestigious all-electric division. 4. Bankruptcies. Musk also stated that such an overcrowded market will inevitably lead to numerous bankruptcies. We already mentioned that the number of EV makers went down from 500 to 90 in just a few years, but that's only the beginning. Just in the last few months, we've witnessed 5 cases of bankruptcies. And what's particularly interesting is that most of the bankrupted companies were once considered promising and prominent. Just take WM as an example. This EV maker had and still has excellent technology, but the management was never able to establish a functional operational model. And with the lack of sales, supply chain issues, and other factors, it managed to go into bankruptcy, even though it started with a pretty impressive capital of $5.3 billion. Other companies managed to go into bankruptcy even though they were part of much bigger conglomerates. For example, Evergrande New Energy Auto was part of one of the world's biggest conglomerates, so we could say it had plenty enough resources to start the business. But the investment wasn't followed by good sales numbers. Moreover, these numbers were so bad that the company would eventually come to the point of losing $17 million on every level it sold. Neuron and Leapmotor are a few more names worth mentioning. But what's more intriguing is that this wave of bankruptcies has just begun. Many more are expected in the following months. 3. Trade barriers. Frankly, I think if there are no trade barriers established, they will pretty much demolish most other companies in the world. This is what Musk said a while ago, pointing out the competitiveness of Chinese EV companies. He also stated that he expects that soon enough, of the top 10 car makers in the world, 9 will be from China, pointing out that his Tesla is the only Western company that competes with them. But Western governments were smart enough to prevent Chinese companies from easy expansion. Instead, there are all kinds of protectionist measures that prevent Chinese EV makers from selling their models at competitive prices and establishing their position on the market. As a result, there are just a few companies that manage to sell their EVs in Europe, for example. These are mostly Chinese legacy car makers, companies that were selling internal combustion cars at first, companies like MG and Geely. On the other hand, EV startups and most other companies are forced to compete in the domestic market that, despite the huge size, is still quite limited, if we consider the number of car makers and the willingness of Chinese citizens to accept electrification. Currently, plug-in electric vehicles account for a little bit more than a third of the total automotive market. And in such a fierce competition, it doesn't surprise that even the biggest companies struggle. 2. BYD's case. As mentioned, probably the biggest problem Chinese companies have at the moment is their inability to expand to Western markets. Even the leading companies struggle to establish their position in foreign markets. BYD, for example, sells its EVs in Australia, but its presence in Europe is minimal. As a result, 95% of its sales are made in the domestic markets. With that in mind, it isn't a surprise that the current slowdown in the Chinese EV market affects BYD's performance significantly. In February, the company sold 50,000 electric cars, which is a massive 40% decrease compared to January. It doesn't surprise that the company was forced to buy back some of its shares recently to safeguard the interest of shareholders and enhance the confidence of the current and future investors. As a result, the company invested $55.6 million to increase the amount of shares by 100%. What's coming next? That's hard to say, but there aren't many reasons to feel optimistic at the moment. 1. The bloodbath has already started. With all the things we talked about, it's pretty legal to say that the so-called bloodbath has already started. The market is slowing down, while the ongoing price war affects everyone. The big ones are stumbling, while most of the small companies are clinically dead. We already talked that there are just around 90 EV companies left in business in China, and that number will continue to drop at a fast pace in the future. Because out of these 90 companies, at least 1/3 produce less than 500 vehicles quarterly, while only 20 companies work at 60% or higher of their capacity. Moreover, the gap between big ones and small ones is getting bigger and bigger. Thanks for watching and see you next time.